Some welcome news for parents in Ontario. Education workers are collapsing their protest sites and they'll be back on the job tomorrow. That move comes after Premier Doug Ford promised to repeal controversial legislation that invoked the notwithstanding clause.
As a gesture of good faith, our government is willing to rescind the legislation. We're willing to rescind Section 33, but only if QP agrees to show a similar gesture of good faith by stopping their strike and letting our kids back into their classrooms. I urge QP to continue to talk with us at the bargaining table. We're willing to make a fair deal, one that offers more help for lower income workers.
Multiple public and private sector unions came out in support of QP. Laura Walton is the president of QP's Ontario School Board Council of Unions, and she says the government has made the right decision and her members want to get back to the bargaining table. But she also made it clear that private and public sector unions found the government's tactics alarming.
As a gesture of good faith to this announcement, QP OSPCU will be collapsing our protest sites starting tomorrow. We hope that this gesture is met with the same good faith by this government in a new proposal at the bargaining table as soon as possible. And I will be clear, we're here waiting right now. The time is ticking.
Now, the about-face by the Ford government paves the way for talks to start again. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is at the Ontario Legislature, and she tells us the two sides still have a lot of work ahead of them to reach a deal.
The union representing 55,000 education workers is claiming victory today, saying we won. They say that their pressure worked on Doug Ford's government. Doug Ford earlier today did make the offer to rescind Bill 28 if the union agreed to put an end to their strike. Bill 28 was introduced last week in the legislature and passed very quickly. On Thursday evening, it was passed. And it imposed a contract on these workers. It also stripped away their right to strike, and it invoked the notwithstanding clause, something that's very rarely done in Canada. Ford defended that move, saying it was necessary to keep kids in class. He described the offer this morning as a massive olive branch, and he said the government was willing to get back to the table to try and reach what he called a fair deal for these workers. That's what the union says they're still after, a fair deal. Wages is one of the key issues in these contract negotiations. They're saying they're happy that Doug Ford has agreed to repeal Bill 28 and that they are ready to get back to the bargaining table tonight. But they say they will keep fighting for higher wages, and they did not completely take the idea of a strike off the table, saying it's possible they could still do that at some point in the future because it is their right to do so. Now, it's not clear when Bill 28 will be rescinded. The legislature isn't sitting this week. It's not scheduled to. So it's not clear if they will be recalled to do it quickly or wait until they're back. A statement from Education Minister Stephen Lecce said they will rescind Bill 28 at, quote, the earliest opportunity. Now, meanwhile, school boards now communicating with parents about what will happen tomorrow. Many schools across Ontario were closed to in-person learning on Friday and again today. But now with the union saying their workers will be back at work tomorrow, it's expected that schools will be telling parents that their kids can go back to class. The Toronto District School Board has already made that announcement, saying schools will reopen tomorrow. Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC News, Toronto.
So for more on this, let's talk to some parents who have been affected by it. We've reached Jessica Lyons in Toronto. Jessica has 3 elementary-aged children and is an Ontario Parent Action Network organizer. Welcome to the program. We've also reached Heather Donovan in Bracebridge, Ontario. Heather has a 12-year-old who's been diagnosed with dyslexia. Both of you, I appreciate your time. Jessica, let's just start with you. What's your reaction to today's news?
My reaction is that education workers have shown us how powerful they are. They have built so much unity and strength that they forced a majority government to rescind a bill that they rammed through, to take that, to undo it, to blank. And I think that is tremendous. That is a triumph. And I think, workers all over Ontario are so very grateful for their leadership and their strength. But I also know that, education workers are still without a fair contract. And so, we're concerned about this. Parents need to see education workers get a fair deal. We need to see that our schools be fully funded, and we need more education workers in each school building for that, and we need them to be earning decent wages. And I encourage all parents to show visible support with their purple squares tomorrow at school.
Jessica, let me bring you in on this conversation. Classes return for in-person learning tomorrow. What is your thoughts on that? And what's it been like for you and your children?
Is it to me?
Oh,
Heather or Jessica?
Heather, sorry.
Oh,
sorry,
no
Heather.
worries. I'm sorry. What? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. My apologies on that. Classes do return tomorrow for in-person learning. What are you and your children, how are you reacting to all of this?
It's a mixed emotions. Am I glad that the schools are going back? Of course. But it's just so up and down. Do we make lunches? Don't we make lunches? Is there going to be, how are the children affected by all this? Like one day they're in school, one day they're not in school. Is this the end of it? Are they going to be able to negotiate, or are we just going to face this again down the road?
So it's been tough.
It's extremely tough, and it's tough for me as a parent, and I'm an adult. I can't even imagine how that translates to the children. Like, stability is the number one thing, and there is absolutely no stability. They haven't had stability in years.
And your 12-year-old daughter has dyslexia. So
My son.
Your son, sorry about that. Your son has dyslexia. How important is it for your son to be in class?
It's vital. It's not even, it's without being in class. He already struggles to learn in class. When he's not in class, there is no learning, period.
Yeah, that's really hard for you. Let me bring you back in on this, Jessica. Talk about what it's like for you and your children when they're not in school, because everybody's been going through the COVID pandemic for a couple of years, and then to have this kind of hit again. Just talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I really echo my guest. I think the transitions are tough, and what we need is kids to have that stability to adjust to school. And that's why it's so disappointing that the Ford government has forced this issue. They had months to settle a fair contract. Now they're introducing crazy legislation. Now they're taking it back. I mean, this is a roller coaster and a crisis that is all their own making. And we know that education workers have been consulting parents, have been listening to parents, and are fighting for the schools that our children deserve. And parents really need to echo that support really strongly right now, because a deal hasn't been reached. So we haven't finished this fight yet. And so I encourage all parents to really get out there and be vocal with your support.
Heather, let me just ask you this question, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. The Ontario government says if they give this 11% to these workers, then that sets a precedent when going into negotiations with other unions, and they simply can't afford that. What are your thoughts on that characterization?
Absolutely. The situation, I can see it from all sides. It does set a precedent, and like I've stated this before, every time there's a contract negotiation, it just seems like there's a strike. And striking in the past has always been like the last resort. Now it just seems to be the first option. And like the money, where's this money coming from? I don't disagree that they need to increase the wages of our support staff. They're vital. But like we went through a pandemic, the budget, this money just doesn't generate. It has to come from somewhere. And I do sympathize with the Ford government in that aspect. And I agree, it sets a precedent. And I don't know what the solution is, but I don't blame the Ford government for saying that.
And Jessica, let me get you in on this as well. And when it comes to that argument, clearly across the country, there are tough economic times for all levels of government. And
actually, that's not true. There's a $2 billion surplus in Ontario right now. There was $1 billion unspent in last year's Ontario education budget. There's absolutely the money. And actually, most parents are workers and we all need a raise. And we see that what needs to happen is that education workers should set a high bar, because that will improve our chances as workers of all different kinds. I'm a nurse. I know what it's like to be facing wage restraint legislation. This is actually really important that we all stand together. The Ford government has created budget restrictions that are fictional because there's a surplus, but also has provided tax cuts to friendly donors.
But let's just talk about the fact that if they give this 11% here, that it sets a precedent for other unions, and then that's going to be, very, very expensive. Jessica.
Yeah, so I'm speaking in support of that. First of all, I believe the last offer that CUPE made was just over 6%. So they have come down. But we know that these workers have faced wage restraint and suppression and have had zeros and 1%. And now we're facing a situation where there's extreme inflation in this province. And, food banks are out of food. There's extremely difficult economic times. Workers actually need a raise. That's what we need.
Heather, let me get your response to this. I heard you wanting to jump in.
Yeah, I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact that these workers absolutely deserve a raise. But I do understand where you're coming from, that it's, if they were to agree to the 11%, like, to my knowledge, or that I've been part of, 11% is the highest I've personally ever seen or that I can recall. And it would set a very, very dangerous precedent, in my opinion. And like, I do realize that the CUPE did come back, or we've been told that they came back in half their offer. And so if that is the case, then so be it. But I do agree that 11% is a very dangerous course to go down, because that is exactly what's going to happen. The next union is going to strike and demand the same. And where does it end?
Yeah, Jessica, let me just bring you in on something else before I let you both go. Let me ask, and I know, Jessica, you're hoping that they get this raise. They've brought the level of what they're asking for down. But when you look at what, I'm going to ask Heather the opposite question. When you look at what they could do at the table to solve this, what could CUPE do on its behalf to get this solved?
I think that I think what CUPE is doing and what parents and community need to keep doing is send a clear message that they are fighting for improvements to our schools. They want our children to be happy, learning, and thriving, and that's what parents want too. And what they need for that is more education workers in each school building, which is part of the demands, more education workers, a better service for students, and also a living wage, so they don't need second and third jobs in order to make ends meet. And if you were
just quickly, if you were sitting, I think that's agreed. All parents want their kids in school. If you were sitting at the table, what would you concede? Jessica, sorry.
I'm not, you know what, that I guess that's not my focus. My focus is to add pressure, because I believe that the government could and should grant all of the demands to CUPE. I believe
isn't it part of getting the negotiations back and part of it getting a deal?
Yeah, that might be. And part of it is showing a very, very, very strong, united support for education workers, so that they have the power to get the best for our kids. And that's what I'm part of. And that's what I hear from parents. That's what thousands of parents have been saying for days and weeks now.
Heather, just asking you from the other side, what could the government do if it were to sit at the table and that's what CUPE says?
Well, I hope CUPE doesn't say that, because it doesn't. That just sounds like demands, not negotiation, and there has to be give and take on both sides. That's the whole point of a negotiation. But I think the government needs to listen to parents. I agree with the other panelists that it 100% needs to listen. There is lots of room for improvement. They can't come back with a 2% offer when the other side is asking 11. That's crazy. They need to meet more in the middle. And I personally think that I am hoping that this negotiation is going to go better, because the bottom line is that the kids need to be back in school. And I do think both sides want that to happen. So hopefully they can put their egos aside and negotiate and do what's right for our children and get them back in school.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to end it there, but I truly appreciate both of your perspectives on this. It was very valuable. Jessica Lyons in Toronto and Heather Donovan in Bracebridge, Ontario, thank you kindly.
Thanks for having us.